And we still don't know which way Putin is leaning. But there are some signs that, in fact, he may be being more influenced by the hawks. There are some hints, for example, at a further mobilization of reservists, which could mean another 100, 200, 300,000 troops thrown into the war and such like. So, while this campaign makes perfect sense for both political and military reasons for Kiev, we have to appreciate that it does have effects on Russian decision-making too.
Ukraine's deep strikes into Russia, targeting its oil refineries and logistic hubs, have brought the war home to many Russians. Petrol shortages mean long queues at garages, and sales at the Russian equivalent of Amazon have been disrupted because they've been hit by Ukraine strikes. There's a danger, though, this strategy could backfire, play into the hands of hawks, encouraging President Putin to escalate the conflict. The Russia expert and Sunday Times columnist Mark Galeotti has written about this and joins us now. Mark, good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, for anyone who's not been following this, can you explain to us the sort of depth and scale of these deep strikes that Ukraine has been firing?
Yeah, this is definitely a new stage of the war. They're now able to reach targets 2,000 plus kilometres away from the Ukrainian border. So we have seen successive waves of different attacks. They've been focusing at different times on ships sailing in the contested Azov Sea, bringing Russian freight out, in other words, to try and stop it from exporting its goods. They've hit, as you mentioned, oil refineries, which, yes, for a while was leading to very long, hours-long queues at petrol stations. And now they're shifting their focus to wild berries, this sort of Russian Amazon equivalent, which might sound trivial, but it's a way precisely of not just hitting the overall Russian budget, because probably the government will have to bail it out, but also the daily lives of ordinary Russians, to really bring home, as you said, the fact that there is this war going on and that it actually has costs for all of them. So, it's a campaign which is using the fact that Russia is just too big for it to be able to protect every single potential target, and also increasing Ukrainian capacities to be able to reach out long range into the Russian heartland.
Why is it that your analysis is that actually the success of those deep strikes could backfire?
Well, look, firstly, it's important to say that none of this is to say, oh, well, whatever happens, it's Ukraine's fault or anything like that. It just inevitably, in a war like this, you have move and counter move. Now, from the Kremlin's point of view, obviously, this is a bad thing because it demonstrates its incapacity of protecting a whole variety of different targets. But this comes at a time when there is clearly a certain behind-the-scenes debate. Ultimately, Putin is the man who makes the decisions, but there are two camps that are trying to influence him. There are I won't call them doves, but pragmatists who are saying, look, basically this war has reached a point of diminishing returns. We're inching forward on the battlefield at massive human cost. We're taking greater hits to our economy. Let's just essentially freeze the front line, start negotiations and declare a victory. And then there are the hawks who say, no, the reason we're not being successful enough is we haven't been tough enough. We need to mobilize more troops. We need to be even more vicious and brutal. And the thing is that clearly at the moment, both sides are trying to use the current Ukrainian campaign and Ukrainian successes to prove their point. And we still don't know which way Putin is leaning. But there are some signs that, in fact, he may be being more influenced by the hawks. There are some hints, for example, at a further mobilization of reservists, which could mean another 100, 200, 300,000 troops thrown into the war and such like. So, while this campaign makes perfect sense for both political and military reasons for Kiev, we have to appreciate that it does have effects on Russian decision-making too.
Yes, so in some ways, it's a bit of a trap for Zelensky. You escalate successfully and you invite it back.
Well, look, this was inevitable. Basically, Putin is in a position where this war, to a degree, is existential for him, or at least he certainly believes so. Things like the prospect of losing the Crimean Peninsula, which, after all, Russia annexed, all the way back. That would be something that I think he thinks would really galvanise the elite against him. So, he is basically in a corner. And obviously, if you're in a corner, you're going to essentially reach for potentially more dangerous ways of trying to fight back. But if we spin that round, it's worth noting that the reason why this debate is happening in Moscow is precisely because Ukraine is being successful. It's managing to slow down any rate of Russian advance and make sure that there's a terrible, terrible cost being paid for it. And it is now also able to reach out and hit the Russian economy. So in some ways, we should see this as a symptom, a byproduct precisely of Ukrainian success.
Yeah. And how long, if Zelensky wanted to maintain a campaign like that of the deep strikes, how long can he do that for?
This is the thing we don't know, because the Ukrainians, for entirely understandable reasons of security, don't put out figures about their production rates. Because after all, the drones that they're using are not these little first-person view drones that we see, the sort of thing that you can basically buy off an online retailer. I mean, we're talking about these long-range drones that are much more complex and difficult to make, as well as cruise missiles. Ukraine is now producing its own so-called Flamingo cruise missiles. We don't have accurate figures for the production rates. So in that respect, we don't know if Ukraine essentially can carry on the current level of campaign indefinitely, or whether it's actually burning through stocks. And that's the whole point. Ukraine needs to keep Russia guessing.
Yeah.
And I think the trouble is that we're coming up in due course for winter, and that's when we know the Russians are going to start hitting Ukrainian energy infrastructure and so forth again. So from the Ukrainians' point of view, they would like to bring the pressure to bear now in the hope of trying to force an end to the war before winter.
Mark, thank you so much for your time and for the context. It is a brilliant read in the paper as well today. Mark Galeotti, Sunday Times columnist and Russia expert, on the dynamics really of what's happening with these drones. A little bit later on the program.